Ladies and gentlemen, this is the 12th and final round.
Right hand, Golovkin steps in and down he goes again. Unbelievable. Mayweather makes a pay. What a rookie mistake. A sensational left hook by De La Hoya.
It's fact. I'm the best. You know what I mean? Sometimes I don't want to believe it myself, but it's the truth. I'm the best.
I'm going to show you how great I am.
From Southern California, this is the Last Round Podcast.
Welcome back to episode 175 of the Last Round Podcast. Thank you again for joining us, whether you're listening on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, Audio Boom, wherever you're at, however you're listening. We appreciate you being with us this week. We had a lot of boxing, a lot of big events this past weekend, and another probably the biggest or one of the biggest events up this upcoming weekend with the Canelo versus Bivol fight in Las Vegas, Nevada. And helping us this week in terms of reviewing and previewing and talking all the latest news and notes in this crazy world we call boxing. He's back. I believe this is the second time he was on here in the past with Mike. I think Mike was writing solo in that episode. If you guys heard that episode, Mike went through his career with him, and you guys learned a lot about him. Boxing writer and commentator Corey Erdman joins us again on the Last Round. Thank you for joining us, Corey.
Thank you, guys. Happy to get the full experience this time too. I'm glad. Michael needs a hand. He shouldn't be doing all that heavy lifting.
I know, man. That's why
you were here last time. You had to hold my hand.
Yeah.
Well, now you got, like you said, now you get the full experience with both of us. So we're both here, man. But the good thing is that if one of us isn't here, the other one steps in. So we kind of we bounce off of each other back and forth like that. So it's not that bad. But once again, Corey, thank you for giving us your valuable time here on the Last Round, and jumping right back into it in our normal duties here on the Last Round. Fight reviews this past Saturday, the 30th of April, from Madison Square Garden in New York City on DAZN. Katie Taylor remains undefeated at 21-0 with the split decision victory over 10 rounds against Amanda Serrano. Katie Taylor retains her undisputed lightweight world titles. Corey, just give us your initial reaction. What'd you think of the fight? And did you agree with the decision?
Yeah, I first of all, I was okay with the decision. I thought that anywhere from 6-4 Katie to a draw to 6-4 Amanda Serrano, I thought was perfectly acceptable, and I wouldn't take issue with any of those scores. But the main takeaway from that night, and I was lucky enough to be there, a couple inches away from the ring, was that I think that was the loudest boxing crowd I have ever been in. And I've obviously been to a lot of events in my lifetime, in a lot of different environments, in a lot of different places. But that energy was something different. It was something special. And it felt like there was kind of like a wall of sound surrounding me at all times, especially when you're on the floor. It just felt like you were kind of like in this envelope of energy and sound. And, it was something special. It felt like the people there, like, it felt like a celebration of women's boxing. It felt like a celebration of, like, finally this was given this kind of platform that it's probably deserved many times in the past. And all that emotion was coming out, I think, from many of the people in the audience. And, that's not something that you can manufacture. And it's maybe not something that you can ever replicate again. You only get one crack at these first times, at these special moments. And it definitely felt like that for everyone that was in the building.
Obviously, you said you agreed with the decision, excuse me. And obviously we've seen, I think Jake Paul, and at least from my standpoint, I think Jake Paul got the ball rolling on that narrative. Obviously he's Amanda Serrano's promoter. He's going to back his fighter. It was a close fight, split decision. So he's going to say, it was robbery. He threw that word in there. Once I saw that word thrown out, I was like, oh no, here we go. So then the ball started rolling, and then people started debating, going back and forth. Tell us why you think it wasn't a robbery, since that word's been thrown around the last couple of days from this fight.
Yeah, for sure. I think from my perspective, and it's not like I didn't have a scorecard in front of me as I was watching this, but from my perspective, I think that I think it's totally acceptable to give the first 3 rounds of that fight to Katie. if you want to, and I wouldn't take issue with that. And I think that maybe the last 3 rounds, you could also get like 8, 9, 10, you could also score for Katie Taylor. Those middle rounds were certainly really eye-catching, especially that 4th and the 5th round, especially when Serrano almost had Katie Taylor out of there. Those are basically not debatable. But again, those opening rounds and those closing rounds, I think you could score for Katie, and there you have 6 rounds. And again, if you want to then take one of those rounds away, then you have a draw. So I don't take issue with a 6-4 score in either direction. And I don't take issue with a draw either, which was actually my prediction for this fight. I was on Chris Mannix's podcast, and he asked me for a prediction. And granted, it was a little bit of a cop-out because I didn't want to make a pick on the air. But I genuinely thought that a draw was going to happen, because when I was envisioning this fight, and I couldn't have possibly predicted that it was going to be as good as it was, but I was seeing a lot of those kind of frenzied exchanges that are very difficult to score for judges, and especially when you have 2-minute rounds and you don't get as much time to kind of think about what that round was like, that gets really difficult for judges, and you wind up seeing judges kind of going both ways. So that's how I saw this. That's how I foresaw this kind of unfolding. Again, I couldn't have possibly predicted it being as good as it was. But again, like, that's how I saw it going. And I think that, anywhere in that neighborhood was acceptable to me.
Do you think that, and I think I talked to Mike about this, a couple hours after the fight, this fight, like a lot of, it got a lot of mainstream attention, obviously, especially in the United States. They were on the Today Show last week, which was big. That was huge. When I saw that, they were both fighters were on there. That was a big deal. So with all the attention they were getting, from the mainstream media and from, huge celebrities. I know The Rock talked about it. I think he tweeted about it or something like that. You kind of expect that there's going to be a lot of casual, non-hardcore boxing fans watching this event, right? So I think from my perspective, I agree with you. I honestly thought it was a draw when the fight was over. I thought they were going to call it a draw. I was like, okay, it sets up a rematch, and then they'll go from there, But when the whole, when the whole robbery thing with Jake Paul started coming out, and he started saying this and that, and then the Serrano camp and the fans started coming out and kind of fighting the debate from their side, what kind of sprang in my mind was saying that, well, there's a lot of casual fans watching, and when there's a lot of casual fans watching a big fight, or a fight for that matter, it's easier for them to kind of get sucked into the magic within boxing. So because it was a close fight, and because Serrano arguably, regardless if she lost or not, she probably had the most impactful round that she won in that whole fight, like you said, in the 5th round. And when you see somebody, on TV or in person, when you see them at their most vulnerable state, which Katie Taylor probably, if there was 3-minute rounds, she probably would have been knocked out, or at least would have went down. I think people, because there's a couple people who texted me after that, and asked me like, oh, Serrano almost knocked her out. How did she lose the fight? And they're not traditionally boxing fans. They don't watch, the Shakur Stevenson, Oscar Valdez fights like us, or, the Fantasy Spring Casino fights like we do and stuff like that. Which I can understand, casual fans are different. So do you think that because there was a casual audience watching this fight, invested in this fight because of the attention it got, do you think that affects, and I guess from a general standpoint, do you think that affects the narratives that sometimes subsequently come out of fights like that?
Yeah, I think, what you're describing is a problem that's very unique to boxing, or, maybe, like if you were watching a judge sport like gymnastics or figure skating or something like that, where it's the result is in the hands of, an objective party. That is unique to boxing. And yeah, we've seen that with other fights that have kind of broken into the mainstream. And I don't want to put it on this level necessarily, but let's just take like Mayweather Pacquiao, for example, right? There were people who were very casual boxing fans, don't watch boxing on a week-to-week basis, don't maybe understand. And maybe they saw that one moment when Pacquiao lands the left hand and Floyd goes to the ropes. That's what sticks in their mind. So they think, oh, that must mean he won the fight. Whoever landed the one most punishing blow, wins that fight. Like it's a problem that boxing has that it also can't solve, because that's just how boxing is scored. That's just the way that the sport works. What you hope is that the fight was good enough that they say, okay, maybe I don't understand this. Maybe I've texted my friends who do know boxing and they've explained it to me, and now I'll come back because that fight was good enough and the environment was good enough that, all right, maybe I don't fully understand how this is scored or why Amanda Serrano didn't win this fight, but damn, do I want to watch that again because that was great. Like that's what you hope comes out of this. But yet that's always going to be a problem for boxing. Is it's complicated. Like you don't have that in any other sport. If your friend doesn't watch a whole lot of basketball, but they tune in with you, maybe you have to explain to them what a foul is, but they understand that the Celtics won because they scored more points, right? There's no ambiguity there. That's always going to be an issue with boxing, is that as simple as it is, it's just a fight between two people. There's a lot of complexity that you have to explain to a new fan or a lapsed fan about how this sport works, how a fight is scored, why someone is a champion, why are there so many belts. Like, yeah, there are complicated things that we, as the people who are involved in this, have to explain to our friends that maybe don't watch on a weekly basis, and that is always going to be a challenge. But you hope, again, back to this fight, that this fight was good enough that is secondary to what they're thinking coming out of watching that fight.
Corey, one thing I was thinking was that fight was amazing. Probably the best female fight that I've seen, boxing-wise. But they can't follow it up. That's the problem. They need to have Taylor-Serrano again. Mm-hmm. And if you're a fan and you're going, you know what, like boxing is amazing, it's pretty much like women's UFC. But there's no one else. She's got no one else to fight that's going to be of that standard. So it's really, really good that women's boxing had that fight, but there's no follow-up. The rest of the fights are pretty much similar to that Cruz Dizern against Cederos, which was atrocious.
Yeah, well, I would argue that there are other options for them, because, Michaela Mayer's talked about going up to 135. Alicia Baumgartner's already talked about going up to 135. Would they necessarily create that magic again? Maybe not, but I think that there are very reasonable challengers for either Taylor or Serrano that are sitting at 130 and are willing to come up. And then maybe, if McCaskill is willing to come down to rematch Taylor or face a Serrano, like there are names in the orbit to keep this going with those names for the next little while. But the what this fight does is it sets off the dominoes that can produce more talent within women's boxing, because that glass ceiling has now been shattered, where we now know, okay, two women can headline Madison Square Garden. They can make $1 million. And for years and years and years, we've seen really good women's fighters in the amateur ranks just not turn pro, because what would be the point? They make more with their national team stipend than they would fighting as a pro for 5 to 7 years. So a lot of talent has just basically given up the sport. Now that those barriers and those thresholds have been broken, we hope that, like the next Olympic class is going to enter boxing. We've seen, fighters like Virginia Fuchs just make her pro debut, who had kind of held off on turning pro, has now seen that this can be a profitable venture. And so slowly, I think that talent pool, and not slowly, I think actually quite quickly, that talent pool is going to start filling up. But in the meantime, I do think that there is enough talent in and around 135 to face one another and produce some pretty big events over the next couple of years.
I think the problem you still have at the minute, as well, is if you're a fighter, you've got that choice. Do I go to boxing or do I go to the UFC? Mm-hmm. And the UFC is a nice, polished package. It's got Ronda Rousey. They can throw that at you. They can throw Amanda Nunes at you. All the different, Andrade, Pena, all those people. And they can say that, look what we did with these. Whereas at boxing, at the minute, you've got what? Shields, Taylor, Mayer, a little bit, I guess.
Yeah, there's less of an obvious pipeline to a steady income. But as we always talk about with the MMA to boxing comparison, is that the ceiling is now much higher, right? And it even is in boxing now, I think, in a general sense, for women's fighters, that the possibility of what you can make in boxing is a whole lot greater. And hopefully this event really starts to change that for women's fighters in boxing. But yeah, to your point, if you are a woman with some fighting talent, you might like maybe that sure thing that the UFC can provide. They can say, okay, if you win, you're going to move up the rankings, and this is kind of what we can do for you. But then you're also trapped in what is basically, a quasi-monopolistic situation in the UFC that you can't really get out of. The opportunities are a lot broader in boxing. So again, hopefully that is what the talented women who are coming out of the amateur ranks are seeing with boxing now. And hopefully, to your point again, hopefully more promoters are more interested in doing this with the women's stars that are coming into boxing as well, because Top Rank only has one woman signed, and that's Michaela Mayer, and Matchroom has quite a few more, but there are only a handful of major promoters right now. PBC has none, right? There's only a couple major promoters who are dabbling in this right now. Hopefully more will now be intrigued after seeing what they saw, because they've now seen two women do that. So maybe some more promoters will say, oh, well, yeah, maybe I'd like to get in that action. And a lot of boxing, a lot of promotion just in general, like it's a copycat industry, right? We've seen that with signing influencers to box, right? Everyone wanted to get on that. With legends wanting to box, everyone wanted to get on that. Maybe now we'll see more of a trend. Except it's actually more of a sustainable trend than just plucking YouTubers or ex-fighters. There are a lot of talented women out there, and hopefully people want to get in on that action and stay there.
I agree that with Mike is that this first event, if they do another one between Taylor and Serrano, just had so much. It was like the perfect storm. It captured the magic and lightning in a bottle, and just it obviously produced the event that it did. It was huge. Everybody, a lot of people were talking about it, mainstream, like I said, big celebrities, and they were all over the place doing press. It was great to see. It was great to see. Corey, what do you think about like Eddie Hearn was recently on I think he was on with Ariel Helwani just before the fight last week. He was on twice, I think today or yesterday too, but he was on last week too, and he was talking about the process and how the process led to this fight being made. And Hearn, and I'm paraphrasing, but he said something to the effect of that once Jake Paul got involved, they were able to get this fight over the line. So, and obviously we wanted to see this fight as boxing fans in the last year or two, the months prior and all that stuff. And there was talk of it, but there was never anything concrete. But Eddie Hearn said once Jake Paul got involved and we pitched it to DAZN, and DAZN saw that Jake Paul's profile was going to raise this fight up into the next level, that's when we were able to get it over the line. So how would you react to a statement like that? Because I mean, like, some people get upset that you kind of give Jake Paul the credit and not the fighters. It's not that they don't deserve credit, but I mean, it's kind of true. Because if you just kind of look at the landscape, as soon as he got involved and he took Serrano away from Lou DiBella, the game changed for both of them. Not only Taylor, but especially for Amanda Serrano.
Yeah, and to be honest, like I feel bad for Lou DiBella having had Serrano for all that time, and for a long time, the only promoter in America regularly putting on women's fights was Lou. But I think both sides, both Katie Taylor and Amanda Serrano, admitted that the thing that kind of pushed this over the line, as you described, was Jake Paul's involvement. Now, for better or worse, like that just is the case, right? And I don't want to take the credit away from the fighters either, because the reason that this fight was great is because of the fighters. But is the reason that a network purchased it, or maybe the reason that a venue chose to get behind it the way they did, is because of his involvement and like a little more juice that he brought to it? Yeah, that probably is the case. Everyone seems to admit that. The other thing that he did clearly was advocate for Serrano making a whole lot more money, because they were willing to walk away from this fight when I think it was offered to them at about $300,000. They said, no, we're just not going to do it. And the pressure that he was able to put on them, whether because he's a master negotiator or just by his mere presence, made a big difference. So yeah, he absolutely does deserve some credit. But yeah, like you said, I don't want to take the credit away from the fighters, who were the ones that made this a special event. And yes, these were the people who pushed it over the finish line, but these were the fighters that were there when this was nothing, when there was no possibility of this being a main event in a major venue, they were the ones grinding it out. Katie Taylor started boxing when there was no women's boxing in Ireland. It was not a thing. She had to pretend that she was a boy. She had to tuck her hair into her headgear, right? So this was not a world that existed when these two started. So again, I want to be careful not to take the credit away from them. But yeah, was Jake Paul's involvement the thing that probably pushed this over the line? Yeah, and I think that both sides admitted as much.
So Eddie Hearn has already said that he wants to have a type of homecoming fight for Katie Taylor in Ireland. She's never fought in Ireland, and a lot of people are surprised about that. Like, oh, she's never fought there as a pro, essentially, and he wants to be able to give her at least one fight before she hangs them up there. So if we do see a rematch, which I think we do, I think they do maybe towards the end of the year. Do you think they try to make it, is Ireland their first stop, or do you think it should be brought back to New York?
I mean, just because this is just my preference, but I would love to see it in front of whatever 60,000 people in Ireland, right? Like that would be incredible. The question is, does Serrano's team agree to that? That's really up to them. But I think that if I were Jake Paul and if I were Serrano, I would also see something neat in that, in going and fighting in front of that many people. I mean, it would be the most attended women's fight in history.
Right.
So I think that I think would be alluring to them to be a part of another kind of history making situation, which frankly is probably only possible if they go to Ireland. But would it be cool to bring it back to Madison Square Garden? Could they hike the ticket prices a little bit more? Would they sell it out again? The answer to both those things is yes. And New York is also kind of like a neutral ground. It's a neutral site for both fighters. There's so many Puerto Rican fans. There are so many Irish fans in New York City. And it's also just like a general hub for fighting. So I wouldn't be mad at either situation. But yeah, I just as just a fan, speaking as a fan, I would love to see it in a major stadium. I'd love to see Katie get that moment of finally being able to fight in Ireland.
Right. Yeah. I think just, being able to see that spectacle of 60,000 fans or what have you for a women's fight like that, especially for somebody like Katie Taylor would be great to see. It'd be awesome to see. But for my personal bias, like you mentioned, New York has a big contingent of Puerto Rican fans and Irish fans. And as we saw from this past Saturday, and you were there in the building, the fandom for both fighters was kind of split down the middle. Everybody had their side within the Garden. And I think that rarely happens in boxing fights, especially, when you fight the A side, you're going to go fight in a territory that the A side wants and all that. So, it kind of goes back and forth, but that crowd was literally split down the middle. And it was great to see, their fighter lands, they cheer, and then the other fighter lands, they cheer, and then one boos. Like, it was cool for the dynamic and to see on TV, and obviously probably for you to be there just to kind of feel that energy and that atmosphere. So for me, I like that whole split down the middle thing because it just adds more magic to a fight like that. But what we'll see. But I do see a rematch coming. Corey, have you heard anything about any type of rematch clauses in the contracts for this last fight?
My understanding is that there wasn't a formal rematch clause, but like I shouldn't be quoted on that. That's just kind of like what the whisper that I heard. But I think the feeling seemingly on both sides is like, yeah, well, why wouldn't we do this again? Right. And they both kind of verbally agreed upon it in the ring, although, we've heard that many times. But I don't get the sense that either one of these women want to run away from a rematch or anything like that. And I think that, Taylor would love to prove that she deserved to win that decision. Serrano would obviously love a second crack at it. And at least right now, again, until a Michaela Mayer or an Alicia Baumgartner move up to 135, this is the best fight for them. And so why not do it again? So my feeling is that there's really no resistance to doing this again next for both fighters. I don't see the point. And Katie, in her words, kind of had, although she won and very easily so, kind of had some disappointing performances prior to this, right? Like fighting the Firuza Sharapovas and the Jenny Hans of the world. I don't think she would say this explicitly, but she probably wasn't getting up for those fights quite as much. And she was dealing with some calf injuries as well leading up to those fights. But I think, Katie wants and deserves to be challenged at this stage in her career the way that she was against Amanda Serrano. And it allowed us, I think, it allowed a lot of people to fully appreciate Katie Taylor in a way that maybe they weren't. I think that there were a lot of people who were kind of ho-hum about Katie because, again, like, she was having her way with that level of opposition. People I think were kind of forgetting how great Katie Taylor was, how important Katie Taylor is to women's boxing, to the sport of boxing. And so I think for her to go back to that level of opposition doesn't really do anything for her. It has to be against a Serrano or a comparable level of competition, the names that we're mentioning.
Moving on in the co-main event of that night on this DAZN card, Liam Smith gets the 10th round TKO over Jesse Vargas. This was for the vacant WBO Intercontinental Super Welterweight title. Corey, when we were previewing this fight last week, I think I mentioned in the last couple of weeks, one of the episodes, I thought this was a pretty decent matchup in terms of like a crossroads fight between both of these guys, because they're kind of like in similar spots right now in their careers. They're close in age and they're not that far apart. So I was kind of looking forward to it. And Liam Smith definitely surprised me. I still thought he still had some stuff left in the tank, but he showed to me, and I don't know about you, but I'll ask you in a second, but he showed to me that he still has a lot left in the tank where he can probably give a decent fight to somebody that maybe like a Charlo or a Castaño who fight in the next week or two here in Los Angeles. Being there, what did you think about watching that as you were watching that fight, and what did you think of Liam Smith's stoppage?
Yeah, I mean, it was a really impressive win for Liam Smith, and it was kind of it's a pretty frightful beating that Jesse Vargas took in that fight. I mean, he took a lot of punishment, and as one-sided as that fight kind of became, especially towards the end, it was a really good fight. I mean, it was a war, especially in those early rounds. But I don't know how much Vargas has left after that, especially after taking that kind of punishment. And if he does have anything left, I don't think it should be at 154. If he wants to kind of test some younger fighters at 147, that is his right. And I think that there could maybe be some utility for him there. But as far as Liam Smith goes, I think, people forget that 2 fights ago, that loss to Magomed Kurbanov probably shouldn't have been a loss. He probably got ripped off. So if that decision goes the way that it ought to have, then he has back-to-back wins over Kurbanov and Anthony Fowler, which is very impressive. And now a win over Jesse Vargas. I totally agree with you. I think that he is an interesting and valid opponent for a lot of those guys at 154. And he will be. I think that he will be able to kind of bide his time and get a crack at one of those top names at 154. And yeah, maybe if they can make it happen, all the belts are basically going to be around one guy's waist. So yeah, is it Charlo or Castaño? Is he, for me, an interesting opponent for one of those guys? I think so. Yeah. Yeah. And it's kind of, again, it's crowded at the top at 154, but there will be at least big paydays for Liam Smith coming out of that fight, and he deserves them.
Mike, what do you think about Smith's win?
Easy work. Jesse Vargas never wanted it. Jesse Vargas doesn't want to be a boxer anymore. Jesse Vargas hasn't wanted to be a boxer since he got paid for the Manny Pacquiao fight. The fact that he moved up to 154 kind of showed that. Didn't even want to diet, didn't really want to train, didn't really look that interested on the fight week. Lasted a couple of rounds and then just couldn't handle the pressure from Liam Smith. We've known he wanted to be a commentator. Now he wants to run for, what is it?
Congress. Yeah.
Congress.
He suspended his campaign. That's over now. So
he backed out. Yeah.
Yeah. He doesn't want to do something. Boxing just kind of was something that he was trying to use to, leap into something else by the sounds of it. And, now he's on his way down, isn't he? I don't even know if we'll really see him in the ring again, to be honest with you. But yeah, I think Liam Smith's gonna, kind of had a little purple patch, a little renaissance at the end of his career. So hopefully we could get, some good fights. I could see him in there with maybe someone like a Tim Tszyu, because Corey touched on, the belts are going to be tied up, aren't they? for the foreseeable future, I would imagine. This was for the WBO. I know Tim Tszew's highly ranked in the WBO. You know, I know they're trying to expand their audience in Australia. So why not, send it over there. And let Corey commentate on it. Let Corey go as well. There you go.
I wonder what Vargas' deal, like if he still has like another fight deal, or this like a multi-fight deal with Matchroom or DAZN, or if this is maybe just a one-fight deal or something like that. So, because depending on, because Tim Tszyu is technically on Top Rank, right? So
well, he's a Showtime fighter at this point, right?
Is it Showtime? Yeah. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Showtime,
so, but
right.
But that's a profitable enough fight, I think, where Matchroom would say, okay, I'll do business on the other side for this. Like maybe we can make this happen. Right. Because again, those like, I don't know, there's not limited options at 154, but again, the belts are crowded, and then you do have some big names that would be profitable for Beefy, and Tszyu is one of them. That's definitely a name that I thought of for him as well. But that's up to Matchroom whether they want to risk one of their fighters against someone with a rival promoter or a rival network.
They were supposed to, if I remember rightly, fight during COVID before he went to Showtime.
Yeah,
but
the
COVID,
that was kind of rumored.
COVID rules and stuff like that. Because I remember watching an IFL interview, I think, with Beefy, and that was why that didn't happen, and he ended up going to Russia. And like Corey said, he kind of got robbed, didn't he? There was a little bit of home cooking there.
Yeah, more than a little bit. Yeah.
But no, yeah, I mean, just driving in our original point with Liam Beefy Smith, I thought he looked great. He definitely surpassed my expectations. And I thought, like I mentioned, this was definitely a crossroads fight for both of them. But I think Smith really earned his spot at 154 to really that he deserves one of the bigger names in that division to give it a shot. His mechanics were good. His inside boxing was good. He was, he impressed me. And obviously we know, coming from a fighting family like he has, he's been around it for so long. But he has a lot of mileage in his career. So I think that's what, at least for myself, that's what I thought kind of would catch up to him. Same thing with Vargas, but obviously he gets the W, and we'll see where he goes from there. And then Vargas, I don't think Vargas retires. I know Mike kind of threw that out there, but DAZN was tweeting out, what's next for Jesse Vargas right after. And I was like, didn't he lose? So I don't think he goes anywhere. I think he's 32, maybe. He's in his early 30s. So he'll still be in and around the sport, unless he gets a highly lucrative commentary job or something. I mean, Corey knows all about commentary gigs over here, so maybe he can hook him up.
Yeah, hey, I mean, Jesse was working for a long time on the Spanish side. That'll definitely be out there for him if that's something that he wants. But yeah, I mean, it's rare that you just see a high level fighter just like. There's always kind of like that winter of their career where they kind of slide down. You don't like to see it, but I mean, there's going to be tempting offers, I'm sure, for Jesse Vargas to come back and fight. Do I think that it's worth it for him to do it at this point with the money that he's made in his career? Probably not, but that's up to Jesse.
Mm-hmm. Definitely.
Danny,
also on the card, Franchon Cruz DAZN gets a unanimous decision win over Ellen Cederus. I hope I said that right. Franchon Cruz DAZN becomes the undisputed super middleweight champion. She was obviously emotional following this win. It's a big moment in her career, especially on a card like that, with the attention that it was getting. What'd you think about her win and that fight as a whole, Corey?
Yeah, I'm super biased because I've known Franchon a long time, and that was really fun to watch. It was fun watching Claressa Shields experience that, cheering for her friend, and everything that Franchon has gone through to get to that point. I just couldn't. I can't be unbiased when it comes to Franchon and being able to be in her locker room and seeing her kind of realize that this was real, and like the realization of someone's dreams like that is just cool for me to experience. As someone that can call her a friend. But as far as the fight goes, I mean, there were a lot of people that were picking Cederus. There were a lot of people that thought that, man, like Cederus is a big physical athlete. She throws straight punches. That's going to be the kryptonite for Franchon. And Franchon just timed her again and again with her jab, first and foremost, but Sierra Rus just never picked up that overhand right, just was never able to find an answer for her, ran into it again and again. And then Franchon did a good job down the stretch, I felt, from the 8th and the 10th, of pacing herself such that she didn't run into something wild in those final 2 rounds, which Sierra Rus definitely needed, and she knew that she needed that. So she, I felt, at the right times kind of used her size, leaned on Sierra Rus, and just ran out the clock appropriately while still landing some good shots and keeping Sierra Rus honest. I thought it was a great boxing performance. There are a lot. The book on Cruz Dezern coming into this was, okay, she's going to gas late, and maybe she's a little bit sloppy with her work. And I thought that Franchon came in tremendous shape and showed people that, whatever the optics of her work in the ring is, like, this is a woman who the only person who was beating her in USA boxing in the amateurs was Claressa Shields.
Right.
So you're probably a pretty damn good boxer if that's the case. It might not look optically pleasing all the time, but Cruz Dezern can really, really box. And it all really came together on this night in a way that it hadn't before for her.
Do you think that, because I think, her only loss is against Claressa Shields in the professional ranks. Do you think that, since then, Franchon has, been on a winning streak, she's been doing well and stuff like that, kind of climbing back up those victory rankings. And Clarissa's obviously hopefully on a collision course with Savannah Marshall in the near future. So hopefully we get that fight. But do you think it's possible that we see a rematch maybe next year between Cruz Dezern and Claressa Shields?
Yeah, no, they've talked about it. And again, even in the midst of celebrating together, they were like, hey, we're going to have to fight at some point, right? Like they're friends, but they understand that there's money to be made with that matchup. But, there's some other options for Franchon too, like maybe against Christina Hammer. Maybe she factors into whatever happens with Shields and Savannah Marshall. Maybe she fights Marshall. Like, there are at least a handful of names that could be interesting for Franchon. It's not the deepest division in the world. I think BoxRec only has like 23 registered super middleweights in the women's ranks. So the pickings will be slim, but there will be options for her, and some pretty good ones too. Like there are some decent names out there for her. But yeah, she may have to wait a little bit to either to face Claressa or Savannah Marshall. But yeah, maybe Christina Hammer, maybe some other names that are out there. Maybe an Emma Kozine who just fought Claressa Shields. There'll be some options out there for her. And again, I'm really happy that she's able to experience that and get some good paydays finally.
Right. Yeah. And I'm sure Franchon will be ringside for a potential clash between Shields and Marshall. I'm sure she'll find a way. Yeah. She'll find a way to be there. Rounding off the card, Galao Yafai gets the victory over Miguel Cartagena. This was for the WBC International Flyweight title. What do you think about this flyweight matchup, Corey?
I mean, it's impressive whenever a guy can come in his second pro fight, blast out a guy like Cartagena. Like Cartagena would be an acceptable opponent for someone who was 20-0, let alone 1-0 coming into that matchup. So that it says a lot about where Yafai is right now. It won't take a long time for him to be kind of in the mix with the guys at that weight class. Yafai is also 29. And when you have the kind of pedigree that he had, and not just the Olympic pedigree, of course, he was an Olympic gold medalist, but he spent some time in the World Series of Boxing too, right? So he's had a quasi-professional background as well. They don't have to wait all that long with Yafai, obviously, before they start kind of maneuvering him into that title picture. And I don't think he wants to wait around too long, I think that, again, at 29, why not just go for it if you're like
Lomachenko?
Yeah, I mean that's clearly kind of the blueprint. I mean, there aren't too many fighters who come in and fight back-to-back 10-rounders to begin their pro career. Lomachenko's one of them. I think like Eric Rosa, one of the minimum weight champions, is another one. There have been some fighters in Thailand that have done that. Like you're clearly in a special class if that's what you're doing. And I think that Yafai can very quickly move up those ranks at flyweight.
Mike, what do you think about Yafai's performance and where he goes from here?
I think Corey summed it up pretty well, really. Yeah, there's not many people that come in and do the performance like him. from one-way traffic as well. You know, it wasn't even close. You know, luckily the corner decided to pull him out and save him for another day. I think, yeah, there's no point in really wasting time and, you know, putting him in there with guys over 4 rounders that he's going to dominate. You may as well, after the pedigree he's had in the amateurs, just throw him in there and, you know, let him sink or swim. And at the minute, he's swimming pretty well. So I think, you know, if I was him, though, I'd still want to dominate the, you know, pick up the British title and stuff like that. You know, that's, you know, so well respected over in the UK. I would maybe just try and go down, you know, that route, you know, pick up those like English, British, European, and then go up to, you know, like, you know, the world-class stage, because I think you kind of, if you skip that level, I think you'll look back on it when you're older and you don't have that, you know, that beautiful British title, you know, that in there in a nice glass case.
It's the best looking title in boxing. I
Honestly,
agree. The Commonwealth title is pretty good too. Yeah.
For me, the British and the Ring Magazine are the two prettiest looking, beautiful belts.
He obviously has a bias.
Right. Yeah. I will say too, like the herd is kind of thinning a little bit at 112 too, which works in Yafai's favor. Like, I mean, the worst style matchup for anyone at 112 right now is Junto Nakatani, who fought on the Triple G card. No one really wants to match up with a guy who's like, you know, 5'7" with that kind of wingspan at 112. But Nakatani is already talking about leaving and going to 115. You know, Martinez might be thinking about the same thing. He already has, but maybe he's clearly having trouble even making weight at 115. So he might be out of there. So really you're left with guys like Sonny Edwards and Delakian and, you know, like the McWilliams Arroyos of the world. And then some lesser names that, you know, frankly, Yafai in a fight or two probably matches up pretty favorably with. So, to your point, maybe he can pick up those belts just to fill out the trophy case, let a couple of those names leave, and then take your shot. Like, I don't think that Yafai needs, you know, more than like 8 fights before he starts chasing those titles, and maybe even a little bit less.
Yeah, I agree. Especially at 29 years old, I think he needs to realize that his foot needs to be definitely on that gas pedal. Moving on, also this past Saturday from the MGM Grand Garden Arena in Las Vegas, Nevada, on ESPN and ESPN Plus in the United States, Shakur Stevenson becomes the unified WBC and WBO super featherweight world champion with the 12-round unanimous decision win over Oscar Valdez. I mean, he was obviously the big favorite in this fight. I know last week when we previewed it in our episode last week, I called it almost a 50-50 fight because I think I was just kind of going with Valdez's heart. Valdez, like, even when the odds are against him, like I think we picked Burchell before he fought Burchell and he knocked him out. So, you know, and then there's a lot of fights before that where Valdez was knocked down and came back and got the win, you know, just depending on what it was. So Valdez always had that heart of a champion, which you have to take into consideration, you know. So I took that into consideration. And there were some people who would ask me, hey, you know, I'm in Las Vegas. Should I place a bet on Valdez? He's actually, you know, isn't he good? I'm just like, honestly, I think that's a safe bet. I was like, you know, that's a safe bet. And you know, obviously Stevenson's a big favorite, but Valdez just has a lot of heart, and it, you know, it's not like he's not a winner. Obviously, if people betted on him, they didn't win. But what did you think about Stevenson's performance, and is it what you expected?
Yeah, I mean, I think it indicates how special a fighter Shakur is. Number one, that the odds were what they were, right? Like when you're advising your friends to go and bet on Oscar Valdez, you're probably thinking like, man, this guy's like plus 550 and it's Oscar Valdez. Like, this is Oscar Valdez. This is one of the best fighters in the division. Like, consensus number 2 or number 1 or number 2 at that time, right? Like, it shows how highly people think of Shakur Stevenson. Number one, that the odds were what they were, that he would be that heavy a favorite against Oscar Valdez in a unification fight. And then for him to kind of have it as easy as he did, or make it as easy as he did against Valdez, like that, this is a very special fighter that is going to be really difficult to beat. And I think that he's already, I mean, he's hitting his head on really what he can do at 130. Like, sure, he can go and try to become undisputed by facing like Kenichi Ogawa and Roger Gutierrez, but they're probably not going to do that. And he's advanced past those fighters, frankly. Maybe they put him in with Robson Conceição. Like that could happen. They can keep that in house and do that. But I think what you're seeing is Shakur is probably ready to be talking about those guys at 130 or Vasily Lomachenko, either at 135 or 130. Like that's the caliber that he's in. And one of the things that was maybe holding Shakur back in terms of his level of hype was the fact that he didn't have like that obvious, other than Valdez, didn't really have that obvious buzzy rival the way that those young fighters at 138.5 have had. Like we spent 2 years talking about Garcia, Haney, Lopez, now Kambosos, Lomachenko. Like these guys, they had obvious rivals at 135. He didn't really have that glaring rival, that guy to chase, or the guy his contemporaries to chase after. Now it's probably time for him to start talking about those names. And, you probably pick him against some of those names too. This is a guy that deserves pound for pound consideration right now, and we'll probably get it when people's lists are come out this week. He's a special fighter who I don't know necessarily what style beats this guy, right? Like, is it just all out pressure? Like for me, I think that he probably thwarts anyone who's just going to give him that. For me, the guy that beats Stevenson is going to be the guy who can outbox him. And that's going to take one heck of a boxer. It's going to take a Vasily Lomachenko caliber boxer to beat Stevenson in and around these weight classes. That's just how I'm seeing Shakur right now. That's how good I think he is.
Corey, you touched on the pound for pound there. Would he sneak into your, top 10, top 5 so far based on that performance?
Top 10, I think I could see him there. I don't think he quite has the resume to call him top 5. If I were just doing my pound for pound off of pure talent, he probably gets some consideration there. I didn't write down my pound for pound list before coming on here, but he's definitely not a name that I'm crossing off by any means. And talent alone, he's among the most talented guys on the planet right now.
I like the way that you do it the same as me, because mine is resume. Because we can see people who have all the talent in the world against these journeyman gatekeepers, but then they fold on the top. They fold at the top. So I like the way that you go by resume. That's what I always do, because people put these, this guy's got the talent, he's in my top 10 already, and you're thinking, but he's not faced anybody yet. But they just want to say, I had Shakur in my top 10 after his first fight.
Yeah, sure.
They just want to be the first.
Exactly. Like, I think that, and you can make your list however you want. I'm not going to argue with people, but I like using talent as a tiebreaker, right? Like, if I think that resumes are comparable, then I'll be like, who do I just think is a better fighter, right? The talent wise, who do I think is better? Like, I like using it as a tiebreaker, or, sometimes you can't just use all resume because someone might have a tremendous resume, but you can definitely tell that fighter is definitely on a bit of a slide, right? Like, people rightfully took like Chocolatito out of their pound for pound for a little bit because the evidence suggested that Chocolatito is maybe on a little bit of a slide. Now that he's not, Chocolatito, he belongs back in that top 10. So I can see instances where that would be the case, but I agree with you. I think resume comes first, and then that tiebreaker is the eye test. It's just your pure evaluation of who you think is better.
Do you think he's talented enough and also, bigger enough in stature to be a 4-weight world champion and finish at 147?
To me, he looked like he had really, really grown in. Like he looked like a big 130.
He was big,
right. Like, and he didn't look like that before. I think that his body is growing, and so I think that 4 weights is definitely within the realm of possibility for Shakur. Yeah, I definitely think so.
I interviewed Jeff Mayweather after the fight, and he said that he thought the only person in and around the weight divisions that he's at now that could beat him, Teofimo Lopez.
Yeah, I could.
I could see that.
Teofimo on the right night, everything clicking as it was before. I mean, and again, like, those are the kinds of fight that now it really gets interesting with Shakur. If suddenly guys like Lopez, who is definitely not going to fight at 135 anymore, so you're going to have to wait a little bit to see Shakur and Teofimo. But like the Haneys and the Kambososes, the Lomachenkos, like those guys, I think are who Shakur is going to be targeting in the next 12 months, basically.
Right. And, going back to Valdez obviously being on the losing end in his first professional loss as a fighter here, it's not, especially how people are expecting Shakur Stevenson's career to unfold as the years go by. I think this loss to Stevenson in regards to Valdez is going to look pretty good later on down the line, in terms of saying like, oh, well, your only loss or your only 1 or 2 losses was to arguably one of the best fighters in the world. So, obviously he'll be back. He was disappointed, but he'll definitely be back and find his stride again. And Corey, you touched on it, during your initial answer about Shakur should probably move up to 135. It's a lot more lucrative in that division for him right now, and his talent has surpassed anybody else at 130 pounds. The money and the bigger talent is at 135. And he obviously, like we just said, he looked big on the night this past Saturday. He looked like a big 130 pounder. He looked like he was, I think they also said that, I don't know if it was on the broadcast or something else, that they had asked him what he was weighing or what he like walks around at, and he didn't want to answer it. So I took that to mean like, okay, like, you know what you're doing.
Yeah.
You don't want that attention to people, so people can say, why are you at 130 then? So I think he knows. And I think like you touched on, I think he'd be a big favorite if he moves up to 135. He arguably would be a favorite against a lot of those guys. And I think how Jeff Mayweather told Mike this past weekend in Las Vegas, Teofimo Lopez would probably be a good matchup against him. Teofimo Lopez is also a big kid too. But what do you think about a Devin Haney at 135 at a 135 matchup with Shakur Stevenson?
Yeah, I mean, it's not going to deliver Taylor-Serrano type action, right? But it's a fascinating boxing matchup between two guys that kind of approach fights the same way, who are experts at pot shotting and not getting hit, who have a lot of different dimensions when they want. I mean, that's a wonderful fight. Of course, we have to see what happens with Haney and Kambosos. But yeah, I'm not going to say no to any matchup with any of those, those 5 kind of names that we've been floating out there against Shakur. I think those are all big money matchups. Those are all really intriguing style matchups. Those are the names that I want to be talking about when it comes to Shakur. There's no mystery as to what would happen if he fought Kenichi Ogawa or Roger Gutierrez. I'll put it that way, right? And I think Top Rank understands that too. Bob Arum pretty much dismissed those matchups in an interview a day or two ago. So I don't think we have to worry about those. I think we're worried about the big names for Shakur. That's what they want.
I've got his next 2, Danny. Fresh off the press. Here we go. Jorge Linares and Gamboa.
At 135? Oh, come on.
Well, they just seem to be getting beaten up by everyone. I don't think Shakur's beating them up yet. So
I know, man. Gamboa just
poor Gamboa.
They're throwing Gamboa out there to everybody, aren't they? It's like, come on, man. But he takes it. It's not like he's a child being forced to do something or something like that. In a kindergarten class, he's an adult. He said yes to these fights. So
yeah, and then he said he was like poised or something before the last.
Yeah,
fight.
It's like
someone
what
slipped something into his drink. Well,
yeah. But I think if we had to ultimately say what Stevenson's next fight was going to be, I think it'll be Conceicao at 130. Because obviously Haney and Kambosos are tied up for now, and could be tied up especially if Haney wins. There's a rematch clause and all that stuff. So, Stevenson's going to move up and fight who? I mean, the thing about that division, like we all know, all 3 of us know, that division is all spread out amongst different promoters. And honestly, we haven't thrown his name in there with Stevenson, but I think a Tank Davis fight would even be entertaining, because Tank Davis might not have the boxing skill that Stevenson has, and Stevenson probably would be a favorite in that fight. But Tank Davis has a mean streak. He has a mean streak that he'll dig in and he'll find it. He'll knock you out. Like you can see when he's swinging for those fences and those knockout victories that he has, he's got bad intentions. So I wouldn't even mind seeing a Stevenson Davis fight, but obviously it's going to be difficult to make since they're on opposite sides of the street. So I think Stevenson stays at 130 for a title defense of his unified titles, or maybe against one of the other champions just to kind of add another title to his repertoire. But because realistically, and I'll pose this question so we can end on this topic, Corey, realistically, if he moves up to 135, who can Top Rank get to fight him?
It's difficult, right? You have he's already fought Nakatila, right? He's not going to fight him. The pickings become a little bit slimmer. And yeah, those big names they're either tied up somewhere else, or yeah, it's Lomachenko, really. Like that's who he's going after. And yeah, I feel bad not mentioning Tank as well, but I don't bring him up because Tank really calls his own shots as far as what he's going to do. Like, it's hard to prognosticate what Tank is going to do next, but I can see a future where Shakur and Gervonta are this generation's superstars and eventually are on a collision course one day in the coming years, right? Like, that for me would be kind of the dream if you get a Shakur and a Gervonta showdown in the coming years. Like that, I don't think it's definitely not going to happen anytime soon. But if I could see them emerging from the pack, and then we have this super fight being Shakur and Tank.
Right. Yeah. So I mean, we'll see, but it's definitely intriguing, and I think Stevenson really has. This was essentially his coming out party to really show, like, hey, I'm the best. Like the level of talent that he has in comparison with everybody else in that division, and maybe even 135 there's a big difference there. Like, you can tell, like, he's got something special.
Yeah, he's special. Exactly.
Yeah, you can tell. And Kevin Iole of Yahoo Sports, he's been on here a couple times, and he's been saying that for 2 years here on the last round, Mike, that Stevenson, he keeps going back to Stevenson. He's like, Stevenson's going to be the guy. He's like, I'm telling you, he's on my pound for pound. And I think one time Kevin Iole removed him from his pound for pound, like his official pound for pound list. And Stevenson quote tweeted Kevin Iole and said, hey, why'd you remove me? So he's watching. He knows. So he knows the list, right, Mike?
Yeah, I mean, he called it a while ago. I just wanted to throw one more thing at you guys before we move on from obviously this one. Do you think he can turn the fans around? Because I know, watching the show, when he walked out, he got booed. Even when he won, he got booed. So
I think he likes that, though. I think he likes that.
Yeah.
Like, I think he embraces that professional wrestling heel character. When he won when he was winning the fight in the last 10 seconds, 8 seconds of the fight, he ran away from Valdez and just put his arms in the air and just kind of smiled at him. And that's embracing, and people were mad about that. There was a lot of people mad about that, but he's kind of embracing that bad guy role. But
yeah, it also depends where you put if that fight's in New Jersey, the crowd is the opposite. Right. Like that. So I think that, but to your point, I think that he is comfortable being the bad guy if he has to be, with a particular audience, and he's comfortable, being the fan favorite. Like, you put a Shakur Stevenson fight in Newark at the Prudential Center, it'll probably sell out at this point, and the crowd sounds entirely different, right? Like that's and that's the fun thing about boxing is you can get audiences that'll go either direction.
Yeah, definitely. Also on the card, Keyshawn Davis, the Olympic medalist, gets the 6th round TKO and remains undefeated at 5-0 over Esteban Sanchez, who takes the second loss of his career. Corey, what do you think Keyshawn Davis's ceiling is in the sport of boxing?
His ceiling is potentially a top pound for pound fighter in the sport. Like Keyshawn is another a very obviously special talent when you see him, and like. And you saw that in the amateurs too, that when you see a fighter giving Andy Cruz trouble, like they've got something there, right? And Keyshawn has the personality. He has that mean streak that we've ascribed to other fighters as well, and the boxing ability. He's going to be a name that we're watching for a long time, and he'll be where Shakur is, I'm sure, in like not that long from now. I didn't get a chance to watch that fight because I was just getting out of Madison Square Garden. And then even when I got to the bar, which the bars were packed outside of Madison Square Garden with Irish fans. Yeah. So it was very difficult to even see the screen to watch Shakur. I had to go back and watch afterwards. So I didn't get a chance to watch this one live. So I'll leave the thorough analysis of this fight to you guys, but Keyshawn is going to be there with the names that we're talking about. And I don't think it's going to take that long.
Yeah, definitely. He's definitely one to watch as time moves forward. Running off the card, the son of the greatest, Nico Ali Walsh, also remains undefeated with the first round KO over Alejandro Ibarra. I see a lot of people get kind of criticize Nico Ali Walsh, even though it's not his fault at all. Like, why is he getting so much attention? Top Rank, is using him in the marketing perspective and stuff like that. They're pushing him and the son of the legend, the son of Muhammad Ali and stuff like that. I mean, it's there and they're using it, like, what are you supposed to do? And he seems like a nice kid. I've seen interviews with him and how, he seems like a really nice guy. And obviously so far he's performing as expected and getting these wins that Top Rank is putting him in these matchups. What do you think about Nico Ali Walsh, Corey?
Yeah, I mean, obviously he's he's a prospect who's still learning, who's very much like learning on the job. And I understand why Top Rank is doing this, right? Because they boxing, you talked about it before with Serrano Taylor, right? How big of a deal it was when boxing wound up on the Today Show, right? How many things can possibly get boxing that kind of like super centrist mainstream kind of attention? Well, some proximity to Muhammad Ali will do that. So I fully understand why they're putting him on main broadcast, because when they do that, they might get an extra article about it. And when they do that, well, mentioned in that article is that the main event is Shakur Stevenson and Oscar Valdez, right? Like, if what you're telling me is, all right, if we're going to dedicate 12 minutes of our broadcast to putting Nico Ali Walsh in a 4-round opener, and if what it does is get more attention on this card, there are bigger things to worry about in boxing than that. At least it's for a reason. And at least Nico Ali Walsh is learning. He's a real boxer. It's not like they're putting, like a YouTuber, and I also don't have an issue with that, but just for comparison's sake, it's not like they're just plucking an influencer off of Instagram and putting them in the opener. They're putting a real boxer who is in the gym every day, and just happens to have a very useful affiliation that will help this card get more press. It's just not something I spend my time getting angry about.
Right, absolutely, yeah. It's not really worth it, Like, obviously, no. if he turns out to be, what people hope he is, and he keeps winning and becomes, he creates kind of his own legacy path. It's great for the sport, especially with the last name that he has and the lineage he has. It's great for the sport. It's great for the marketing. He'll get a lot of mainstream eyes. Hey, it doesn't hurt the sport, and it raises the paydays too. So who knows? Moving on, this upcoming weekend, fight preview. This upcoming Saturday, the 7th of May, Cinco de Mayo weekend from the T-Mobile Arena, once again in Las Vegas, Nevada, on DAZN pay-per-view, the inaugural DAZN pay-per-view. Saul Canelo Alvarez goes up to 170, goes back to 175 pounds at light heavyweight and goes up against the WBA super light heavyweight champion Dimitri Bivol. Before I get your take on the Canelo Bivol fight, Corey, what do you think about this whole DAZN pay-per-view now that they're jumping into this market?
I am going to fully opt out of this as someone that works for DAZN. I'm going to turn my microphone off, and whatever you guys say about it has nothing to do with me. That's all right. I'm sorry.
No, you're right. That's something we should have remembered. I forgot about that.
I've got a mortgage, guys. I can't mess up the money. I've got a puppy to feed.
Good point. That's something I should have remembered that. I blame myself.
What I will say is that the non-pay-per-view portion will be called by me, so you don't have to pay for that. If you don't want to spend $59.99, you can do that, man. Spend your money wherever you want, but I'll be calling the undercard that'll be streaming beforehand.
Spend your money. Watch the DAZN pay-per-view.
Yeah, there you go.
Call the underfight. Let's just stick with that. So, transitioning to the actual fight, Canelo Alvarez moving up to 175 against Dimitri Bivol. What's your take on this fight? How does it unfold?
Yeah, I'm actually intrigued by this fight, and I know that Bivol, for some people is a little bit of an underwhelming name because it's not like he's been putting on barn burner fight of the year type fights leading up to this, but from a technical perspective, like it's hard when you're very obviously the top fighter in the sport. Almost everyone is going to be underwhelming to some degree, right? Like anyone that you match Canelo up with at this point in his career is going to be less than palatable to someone, right? Like the Triple G rematch is going to be great for, for the mainstream audience because they know who Triple G is and it might make them happy. Really the only name that would kind of please everyone, it seems, would be Artur Beterbiev, but they couldn't make that fight this time around. But for me, like, there are different things that are acceptable to me for Canelo right now. And one is either that, again, like that mainstream matchup against Triple G, that's cool with me. If you want like a strange kind of physical challenge, like moving up to cruiserweight, like he's talked about, that's cool with me too. I think that's interesting. Just seeing Canelo just push his body and seeing how far up he can go and still beat a top fighter. That's fine. Or this, where for me, I think it's just a really challenging technical puzzle that he's going to have to deal with, which is a bigger guy with one of the very best jabs in boxing. How does Canelo deal with that? Like, that's interesting to me. How can Canelo, who is a genius of his craft and the top fighter in boxing, he still challenge himself? Like, yes, he's grown into 175, but he's not a true like 175. Like, he's still 5'8". Yeah. How does he deal with this challenge? How does he get around that jab? How does he pick up that victory? Like, that's interesting to me. And there is a way that he loses this fight because Bivol is a really, really good fighter who isn't going to make a whole lot of mistakes in there. Like, I still find this to be compelling as a fan who appreciates kind of the technique of boxing, but I can also understand how someone would look at this matchup and say, this isn't the most exciting Canelo matchup. I get that. But for me, like, I do find a lot of intrigue in this fight.
What do you think, Mike? What do you think about the matchup?
Corey summed it up really well. Bivol's not known to the mainstream audience, but, us boxing nerds, we know who he is. We know how good he is. The only thing is, a lot of the time when you look at fights, you kind of look at like the last few opponents, and Bivol hasn't been great over the last few performances. His fight against Craig Richards. If Craig Richards had got in the ring and believed from the first round that he could have won that, then, maybe he may have actually have sneaked it because, it took him a few rounds and then he kind of like warmed up and realized, hey, you know what, I might actually have a shot here. And, did pretty well against Bivol. And then his fight against Castillo, Bivol didn't look too good. Callum Smith went in there and sparked, Castillo out in the first early rounds. So, I'm thinking Canelo's going to win it, though. I'm thinking, late. I think he'll do the usual. He'll probably keep putting money in the bank and go into the body of Bivol. And I think Canelo will sneak it. Bivol is also a small light heavyweight. He has spoken about coming down to super middleweight to get the fight against Canelo originally. Mm-hmm. So, he's not like he's fighting someone on, who's verging on a cruiserweight. He's fighting actually a small light heavyweight.
Yeah, right. I think like if you're looking for an optimistic kind of case for Bivol, it's that like in those fights that you mentioned, the Craig Richards fight, especially Umar Salamov last time out, like I think that the optimistic case is that Bivol, when pressed, can be a little bit better. Like he was tucked on undercards against Craig Richards. Like I think he was like the third fight on that card. And maybe like hasn't been entirely motivated. Like Bivol has just kind of won those fights, just sort of jabbing his way to victory. And you wonder if when he's pushed a little bit more, will he look more like the Bivol that we saw against like a Jean Pascal or against a Joe Smith Jr., where I thought that he showed a little bit more dimension, or against Sullivan Barrera, like the HBO era Bivol felt a lot different than the one we've seen in most recent fights. And will we see a more motivated Bivol with a little more spark now that he has the biggest fight in boxing? Will that change Bivol a little bit? That's kind of what we hope for. And I think that's kind of the optimistic read if you're looking for like a case to make for Bivol heading into this fight. Yeah,
I hope that because obviously Bivol is one of those tactical, strategic kind of guys. He can knock you out. He has knockouts on his ledger and all that stuff, but he's very like a sniper type of boxer as well. But I hope that in this fight, because of the magnitude that it's at, and with Canelo being the opponent across the ring, Canelo's obviously going to try to go for the knockout and try to stop him. And I'm hoping, and I'm honestly expecting Canelo to bring the dog out of Bivol. Because when you fight somebody of Canelo's caliber and stature in the sport of boxing, you kind of have to reach down deep to really fight him and to get some type of chance to get the victory. So I'm hoping that Canelo brings that out of him, out of Bivol. Do I think that Bivol's the favorite? No, I think Canelo ultimately takes it. You know, I don't. Maybe I'm going out on a limb here, but I don't think Bivol gets stopped. I think it's more of a decision. But now that Mike, obviously, you were saying that Bivol is a smaller 175 pounder, and he has said in the past, which I did forget about, that he was willing to go to 168 to get the Canelo fight a couple years ago. So he actually did say that. But I mean, I think Canelo's going to go to the body, like you said, Mike. And I'm hoping, and I'm expecting, honestly, that he brings the dog out of Bivol in this fight, because we've never really seen Bivol in, at least that I can remember, in like a dog fight where he really kind of goes for it. And I think with somebody like Canelo, especially fighting in Las Vegas, you kind of have to dig down deep to really try to attain that type of victory against one of the biggest, if not the biggest star in the sport of boxing. So I'm definitely looking forward to it. I like Bivol. I remember interviewing him in his apartment here in Los Angeles a couple of years ago. And he's a nice guy. He's a very humble guy. Doesn't really talk that much. He just kind of goes in there, does his work, and does his thing. When we went, Corey, Mike and I went to the kickoff press conference in San Diego for the Canelo Bivol fight a couple months ago. And Bivol just doing his thing with the media. This was the Ukraine situation had just happened. They were asking Bivol about it, and he was saying, he's like, hey, I got no opinion. I just want everybody to get along. He's like, I'm just a fighter. Like you could tell, like he really meant it. He's like, I just want everybody to get along. Like, I just want to fight. Like, and you kind of feel for something like that. So regardless of what happens, if he comes up on the losing end this weekend, he's still a great fighter. Bivol's still a great fighter, and I think there's still going to be a lot of great fights ahead for him in the coming months and years. What do you think, Corey?
No, I totally agree, and I actually I really like watching Dimitri Bivol. I think I've written about him in the past, and in talking to other fighters, like Sergio Mora loves watching Dimitri Bivol. Like other fighters kind of love the nuance of his game. And if I were like coaching a young fighter, let's say, I would show them someone like a Dimitri Bivol who, because they're not going to get too many ideas in their head about he's like, what he does very well. It's very subtle. His footwork is great. He doesn't get out of position. Like he for me would be kind of one of those blueprint fighters who I would give tape of Dimitri Bivol to a young fighter learning the sport, for example. Does that mean that he's going to beat Canelo? Not necessarily, but again, I think there's a lot to appreciate with Dimitri Bivol that kind of gets lost because, again, it isn't flashy. It isn't always violent like other fighters, but there's a lot of really pretty nuance to his game, to his footwork, and to his jab that I really appreciate and I like watching, especially in slow motion when you can kind of go back and look at what he's doing in there.
Right. Who did you say you were picking, Corey?
In this fight? No, I'm picking Canelo.
He almost had you there. He almost had you. He almost had him. Moving on, Montana Love also on the card, 17-0-1 against Gabriel Valenzuela. This is for the IBF North American Super Lightweight title. What do you think about this matchup, Corey? And what's your take on Montana Love?
Montana Love, I mean, he's a really outsized personality with a lot of physical gifts. Who, to his credit, basically promoted himself until he got the big Matchroom contract. There are a lot of fighters that just get kind of forgotten about. They go through that ShowBox pipeline. We kind of hear about them for a little while and then they vanish, especially guys that come out of the Midwest without a promoter. That doesn't always turn out the way that it has for Montana Love. So he's got himself in a really nice position here where he could get some interesting fights And he's got a good opportunity here. I think that he should be a heavy favorite against Valenzuela. Valenzuela, really struggled against Robbie Davies last year. Like, this should be the kind of guy that Montana Love is a level above. And he turned in a great performance last time against Carlos Diaz, even though he came in a couple pounds overweight. People kind of forgot about it because the performance was awesome. And, he came out with a miniature bulldog as well during his ring entrance, and it was adorable. So he can put on now a string of really memorable, impressive performances going back to the Baranchik fight on the Jake Paul undercard and put himself in a position for a money fight like that. This should be the springboard for that if Montana Love performs the way that he has recently.
Absolutely. Also on the card, Shakram Giyasov. Is it Giyasov? Giyasov goes up against Christian Gomez for the vacant IBF North American welterweight title. What do you think about this matchup, Corey?
That's a potential show stealer of a matchup because Gomez is just a pure knockout puncher. He's just a through and through puncher, and Giyasov is a terrific pressure fighter with angles, kind of in that Uzbek style. Great bouncer, great body puncher, terrific footwork, but wants to be fighting in close. And Gomez is going to oblige. For as long as this one lasts, I think that this could potentially be, in terms of pure action, the most thrilling fight on this card. I expect Giyasov to win. He should win, but it's going to be a lot of fun while it lasts.
And then also Mark Castro rounds out this card against Pedro Vicente Sharabai.
Yeah, we just know him as Pedro Vicente, so we'll call him Pedro Vicente.
Okay. Yeah. Mark Castro, obviously, I think a majority of his fights have been on Canelo undercard since he got signed with Matchroom. So what do you think about this matchup, Corey? And where does Mark Castro land in, let's just say, the next 5 years?
I memean, Castro, was like the blue chipper of the U.S. national team, right? Like, he was who everyone wanted to sign. And he's had like some degree of difficulty in his pro career so far. He got knocked down in his last fight, right? In that fight in San Diego. So I think that this is a showcase fight for him to help erase the memory of that knockdown for Mark Castro. And again, Castro's 22 years old. He's not that far removed from the amateur circuit. And in the infancy of his pro career, basically walked right into a pandemic where things were a little bit difficult. He caught COVID. So he's had some just kind of physical struggles and professional struggles coming right out of the gate, which haven't been perfectly ideal. But listen, guys get knocked down early in their career, and it's not a death sentence for them by any means. This is a showcase fight for him that he should win very convincingly. I'm sure they want him to score a knockout in this fight. And he should. And it's not clear yet whether this will be kind of the headliner of the before the bell portion or whether this will get bumped up onto the main broadcast. We don't quite know yet.
Right.
But yeah, again, more great visibility for Castro, to your point. He's been getting a lot of it. He's always on major undercards, and this is another one.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm really intrigued to see how he develops because Eddie Hearn and Matchroom are definitely keeping him busy ever since they signed him, especially putting him on Canelo undercards. They definitely want to get him that exposure. So it's definitely interesting to see how he progresses. Is there any other fight on that card, on the DAZN card, whether it's before the bell or anything like that you want to mention, Corey, for our listeners?
I would tell people to keep an eye out for another Uzbek fighter who was in the Olympics, the most recent Olympics, Elnur Abduraimov, who's a super featherweight out of Uzbekistan. He's part of that kind of Joel Diaz camp with Giyasov and MJ, and he's close friends with Israel Madrimov and Jalolov. Abduraimov, when he was in the amateurs, kind of had the reputation as one of the most exciting fighters on the high-level amateur ranks. He's kind of like a through-and-through pressure fighter, good body puncher, and he's going to be facing Manuel Correa, who's a Cuban now living in Miami. Not one of the Cubans that came kind of from that famed Cuban system. but a hard-nosed guy who's going to give Abduraimov an opportunity to shine. And if you haven't seen him before, he's a lot of fun to watch. So I would definitely tune in early on Before the Bell to get a look at him.
Absolutely. Moving on, news and notes. Tom Brown of TGB Promotions recently said, I believe in a Boxing Scene article this week, that Canelo was offered $45 million for a Charlo fight and $55 million for a Spence fight at a catch weight of 164, or Benavidez at 168. What was your reaction to seeing that report? Or actually, Tom Brown, I think it was an actual quote from him. What was your reaction to seeing that type of news, Corey?
My reaction was, holy shit, maybe we could get Errol Spence versus Canelo.
I was really surprised that his name was thrown in there. I was like, oh, I didn't expect that.
Honestly, that was my reaction. I mean, it makes sense. I mean, that's the kind of money that Canelo commands. So I think like it wasn't necessarily the money that was surprising so much as that Errol Spence is considering the possibility of meeting Canelo, somewhere between 160 and 168. Like, that's fascinating to me. And the possibility of that now after, and I don't want any more wrenches to be thrown in the way of Spence Crawford. So I don't want to start dreaming about other fights, but the mere possibility that, hey, if Spence wins that fight, that we could get him versus Canelo. Hey, sign me up. Great.
Corey, do you think that if Canelo did take that Showtime deal, for example, and did not go with DAZN and Matchroom over here for this Bivol fight, the reported Triple G fight in September, and then a possible December fight at the end of the year as well. Let's just say he went with the Showtime and Steven Espinoza PBC side. Do you think that that would have put a wrench, like you said, into the Spence Crawford plans? Do you think PBC would have probably tried to keep Spence away from Crawford until Spence gets that Canelo fight?
I mean, it's possible. I mean, with that kind of money on the table, I think, yeah. I mean, the reality is that Spence will get paid more to fight Canelo than he would Terrence Crawford, right? So that, like, just business-wise, I think for both Spence and for the people above him, I can absolutely see. Yeah, so that it probably would have wound up being another roadblock in the way of the Crawford fight. And again, depending on what happens in that fight, like if Spence loses or takes, some punishment from Canelo, maybe it ruins it forever. So maybe it's not the worst thing that didn't happen. Like it's cool to think of that as a fantasy matchup, but for what we all want and for what we've kind of been thinking about for 3-4 years now, maybe more, maybe it's best that didn't take place. I don't know.
Do you think we see, before both of their careers are over, Corey, do you think we see Spence and Canelo match up together?
I mean, given that clearly their sides have already discussed the possibility of it, I wouldn't remove that possibility. And I think that Spence, I guess, like, the issue is that Canelo is now really settled around 168 and 175. And, like, where is he willing to come back down? Or does Errol grow that much that he can feasibly meet Canelo somewhere? Like, the one thing getting in the way of that is Canelo just too big physically to make that a possibility? But now that I've heard about it, I don't really want to rule it out because of course I'd love to see it. But yeah, physically, I just don't know what's feasible and what's not.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. There was also a report this week that Demetrius Andrade has had to pull out of his May 21st fight against Zach Parker, so that'll probably be postponed, and we'll see. Since it's postponed, Corey, do you think Andrade and Parker still make this matchup, or do you think Andrade and his team try to find a bigger, more financially viable opponent?
I mean, that seems to be a serious difficulty for Andrade, doesn't it? So, I mean, maybe the only option is to wait this out and then face Parker. But the other possibility, I mean, maybe they have something else cooking that I don't know about that maybe they can make instead of the Parker fight. But he hasn't had a whole lot of luck for one reason or another getting some of those bigger names in the ring. So, I mean, it would seem that Parker right now is just the best option for him until they've proven that they can make a matchup with someone else. So, yeah, I guess we'll see. But until proven otherwise, that's the best option for him right now. So that would be my answer.
Parker's a mandatory. I think he has to fight him. I think Andrade will drop it.
Maybe, possibly, yeah. I didn't know he was a mandatory, but that makes a lot of sense. It's possible. And then also, I know some of our listeners hate when we talk about these type of guys, but Jake Paul had announced his return to the sport of boxing in an actual fight in August, in the middle of August, I believe, August 13th. I don't know if I don't think he's announced an opponent as of this recording. But Corey, what's your overall take on Jake Paul? I think a lot of us, especially hardcore fans, when he first started, when DAZN and put him on there and all that stuff, they thought, oh, okay, it's kind of like a novelty, just to kind of get some views and just to kind of get some entertainment going. But Jake Paul is actually, you got to give him the credit. He's actually been putting in the work, and he says he's serious. And I think Eddie Hearn even said that he told him off camera, in 2 years I'll beat Canelo. I'll fight Canelo. And so I mean, what's your overall take on Jake Paul, Corey? And what is he serious as he's going forward in his boxing career?
I mean, I think he is, and he's obviously being realistic about the opponents that he can beat at this point in his career. And he tried to fight Tommy Fury, right? Who is not an MMA guy, is not a basketball player or anything. He's a boxer, and he tried to fight him. So it's not the idea that he's trying to avoid boxers. We can kind of dismiss that because he did try. And the reality is that Jake Paul versus just some like a journeyman who might be able to, test Jake Paul, maybe even beat Jake Paul at this point in his career. He doesn't have to do that, right? Like he can make money and fight some of these other names. That is kind of the difficulty with Jake Paul. I was going to say maneuvering Jake Paul, but Jake Paul maneuvering himself is that every fight that he has right now kind of has to be an attraction. There has to be some buzz with that opponent because of who he is. So that does make things a little bit difficult. Like you're kind of either plucking someone from another combat sport, or you're facing someone that might be kind of like a little bit too good for you right now. So it's a little bit difficult for him. But he is taking the training very seriously. And I was next to Jake Paul, with Jake Paul in person, and I didn't realize how big Jake Paul is. Like Jake Paul is a big man. He is a big athletic dude. So like he's a serious athlete, and so is his brother Logan Paul. From the beginning, and I don't want to like brag about that. A lot of people like to say I said it before anyone else. Like you can go back and read what I wrote about Logan Paul and KSI at that point. And my theory of this was, if 10% of their audience is retained, then it was a win for boxing. If one person from their audience was retained, then it's still a net gain for boxing. But I think that Jake has shown that he has, like, he's serious about this as a promoter and as a fighter. And he hasn't done anything to harm the sport. And he's also not doing anything that doesn't exist on lower levels at every level of the sport. Like, I've worked cards where like the son of the local car dealership that's sponsoring the event makes his pro debut and is technically in the main event because that's what funds the card, right? Like Jake Paul sells a lot of tickets and he draws eyeballs, so he gets to be in the main event like that. There is inequity everywhere in the sport that is just based on, that is not merit based. It is based purely on popularity. And he just happens to have an outsized level of popularity that he's been able to utilize while at the same time training hard and taking this seriously enough. And I think getting the respect of enough people in boxing where people are just kind of cool with him being around at this point.
Corey, do you think that Golden Boy and Matchroom would work together? Let's just say Jake Paul, his next fight possibly lands on the DAZN platform. Do you think Golden Boy, is it good for the sport, good for business to throw somebody like a Ryan Garcia on as maybe the co-main event with the Jake Paul, just because that, their audiences, obviously they cross and they get a lot of the same eyeballs. is that good for business?
I actually don't think they need one another. Like, I think that their audiences kind of overlap in a sense. I think that people, I mean, Garcia's fans, there are a lot of them that aren't boxing fans. And like, when Ryan Garcia does great numbers on DAZN. Like, I don't think he needs the assistance of Jake Paul to do that. And he brings in an audience that is not the typical boxing audience plus the boxing audience. So I actually don't think that. I think it would be kind of redundant to put him on the same card. Plus, I think that Jake Paul is contractually obligated to be on Showtime the next time out. But yeah, I think that Garcia can absolutely just stand alone. I don't think that he needs kind of the rub of Jake Paul to make him a bigger star. I think that he's just fine doing what he's doing.
Is Jake Paul contractually obligated to Showtime? I thought I saw something or maybe an interview with him where he said that I think he's a free agent right now in terms of a broadcast partner. Am I, Mike? Did you hear anything about that?
He did sign something a while ago. Remember, because it was
I could
kind of
be
like
wrong.
big. It was like big news, wasn't it? Because you were like, "Oh my god!" Like Showtime have signed him as a boxer,
Right.
But yeah, I don't know. I mean, he has been popping up on DAZN, and I wonder how happy Showtime are about that.
Yeah, I'm not sure. My understanding was that like his next fight was going to be on Showtime as well. But please, do not take this as like gospel or anything like that.
Right. No, yeah. I mean,
yeah.
Now you could be right. I just thought I read something or I saw an interview maybe from his mouth or something like that. But when he announced his fight, I think the tweet that I saw, he just put like his date and his name, but he didn't put like Showtime on there or anything like
That's
that.
true.
So
yeah.
I just took that to seem like, okay, like he hasn't probably secured a deal with a broadcast partner, even though he will, but that's how I took it. But maybe I could be wrong. And Corey, you could be right. He probably has still another fight or two under the Showtime banner.
Yeah, it's possible. And some of that might just be, and he's right. He is his own promoter, right? Like technically, yeah, I guess he's a free agent because he promotes himself. So, and he's free to appear everywhere and in a promotional capacity, appear on networks as well. So, networks are typically okay with, especially in like commentary roles and stuff like that, with people kind of crossing over and doing that. I can't see Showtime having any issue with him appearing on DAZN. Obviously they have their issues, with one another, but I can't see them being like angry that Jake Paul was there.
Right. Well, Corey, we definitely appreciate, your valuable time once again here on the last round. Like I said at the beginning, it's you finally got us both. So you had Mike solo at the beginning, but now you have us both. And, I'm sure you'll be back in the near future quite a few times. But before we completely sign off here, Corey, obviously go ahead and plug your social media, and then you're calling, I think, the Before the Bell, some of the undercard fights in this weekend's Canelo Bivol, correct?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, so you can catch me on there on Before the Bell prior to the Canelo card. You can read my written work every Monday. The lead story on boxingscene.com. There's one up. I guess it's not Monday anymore, right? So you can read Mondays when I wrote about Katie Taylor and Amanda Serrano, and every Monday you can catch my work on there. And there'll be a special, depending on when this comes out, if you listen to it in time, there'll be a special Thursday night card from Toronto, from my hometown, on DAZN as well, featuring Brian Acosta, who's a featherweight prospect coming up from Mexico. He's in Juan Francisco Estrada's camp and Miguel Berchel's camp, a really slick boxer. He'll be headlining on that show. And I believe I'm calling a show on DAZN on June 10th as well, with Hiroto Kiyoguchi defending his 108-pound title as well. So you'll catch me on there. But stuff's always popping up. I'm absolutely everywhere. So follow me on Twitter at Corey_Erdman, and I'll let you know wherever I'm going to be.
The utility man, Corey Erdman. Yeah, you're definitely all over the place in the sport of boxing, but it never hurts to be busy like that. It never hurts. So Mike, go ahead once again. Let our followers and listeners know where they can find us and follow us before we sign off.
We're at The Last Round 12 on Instagram and Twitter, and be sure to join us next week. We'll be reviewing the Canelo card and Corey Erdman's performance. We'll do a little review of Corey's performance. And then there's so many cards next week. Jamel Charlo, Brian Castano, Gilberto Ramirez, Dominic, I think it's pronounced, is it Bozel? Then you have, Kovalev is back against the younger Pulev. And
Briller, yeah.
Yeah, next week's going to be a 3-hour show.
Oh, man, you never know. So once again, For our guest of the week in Corey Erdman, for my co-host Michael Shepard, I'm Danny Z. This is The Last Round.
Thanks for supporting and listening to the show. Follow us at The Last Round 12 on social media. Rate, review, and subscribe. This is The Last Round Podcast.